All right, so it is 12:05. Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, the 15th of March. I am recording. I got this thing just so you're aware of this. I mentioned you should know by now tomorrow is the job fair. I would strongly encourage everybody who is in this class to go to the job fair. Again, I can't force you. I wouldn't force you if I could, but I'm strongly suggesting it. Notice that it says there are over 500 companies now registered. What I did, all the companies are listed here, and I went through and did a search on AWD, and you'll notice there's 50 companies that are listing AWD. So, like I said, I would strongly suggest it. It's at the St. Louis campus. The earlier you get there, the better your chance you're going to have a decent parking spot. Otherwise, you may have to walk a ways. I always say it's good to be there early, but it's always up to you. And I would bring resumes. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So today we're going to complete. I did fix the tic-tac-toe app, so I'm going to talk to you about it. Next, we can quickly look at exercise 10.1 at the end of chapter 1. Then we're going to go over chapter 11, which is on data validation. And we're not going to get to the build a quarterly sales app. I'm going to do that tomorrow. And tomorrow we should be done then with chapters 10 and 11. Friday will be a lab, and Monday will be a lab. And then come Tuesday of next week, we're going to jump right into chapter 12. Probably the biggest chapter we've covered thus far, because again, that's the chapter that is, constantly in the past, whenever they have referred to something with databases that they didn't want to talk about in depth and breadth of coverage, they said more on that in chapter 12. So we'll do that for the rest of next week. And then the following week, we will be into chapter 13. And that is the actual book website that they've created. It's a complete site, and we'll talk about that. So you can plan on there being at least 2 lectures at a minimum, probably Tuesday and Wednesday of next week on chapter 12, and then the rest of the period lab, and the following week a minimum of 2 days, and then lab as well, just so you've got some kind of an idea what's going on. All right. So with that, let's go in and take a look at what was wrong with the tic-tac-toe game yesterday. And I found errors in 2 files. So the first thing I'd like you to do, if you would please, is to bring up the index.cshtml file. And that index.cshtml file is the one that's under your views, home, and then index.cshtml. All right. Once you've got that, and hopefully you can tell from my stuff here, this is what we had here. This is what we had. It was wrong. I just copied this from above. I should not have done so. This is what we want here. So you can remove this, or you can comment it out like I did. It's totally up to you, but please put in that line. All right. That's the only thing that's wrong with that particular file. The other one is with the tic-tac-toe board class file, and there's several changes we have to make in there. We'll go over that in just a moment, but I'd like you to key that one in first. So I'll shut up and I'll give you until the clock turns in a minute from now to 12:10. All right, so that's it for that file. So let's bring up the other one, which is again the tic-tac-toe board. And I want to take this from the top. All right. The first thing, and this is the main reason that stuff wasn't working yesterday, is we have to add this line. So right up above the for each statement, or right below where you're creating the two string arrays, however you want to look at it, please add that line, because we were referring to cells and we technically had not set it yet. So again, make sure you put that line in there. All right, then next, and as I work my way through here, please take a look at this, because it's possible. There's two things. First of all, I've got an if there. I made all these ifs. These should have all been else ifs. Everything that's in there should have been an else if after the first one. So you can change all the ifs after the first if. So starting with middle row win and going down to right center, left diagonal, make all of those else ifs. That's the first thing. Second, I'm not sure which one, but check the numbers in here with the mark and the winning mark. One of them I think I changed, but unfortunately I didn't write down which one I changed. So I'll give you a second to look through these first three, because that's the top, the middle, and the bottom. Though that's our rows. And again, I'll wait until the clock goes till about 12:12 or so, and then we'll jump down to the next three, which are our column wins. All right. So again, all of these will be else if statements other than the original if, of course. But make sure you've got here 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8. And for your marks, 0, 3, and 6. All right. All right. Then going down and checking for the column wins. Here is our left column, our middle column, and our right column. All right, so again, make sure those are all else ifs. Check the marks. Make sure the first one is 036. The second one is 147. The third one is 258. And make sure the winning marks are 0, and then 1, and then 2. All right, then finally for the last two, which were our diagonal wins, that's these here in blue, make sure that they're both else ifs, and make sure that in the is winner on the first one, it's 048. And with the second one, it's 246. The winning mark on the first one is 0. The winning mark on the second one should be 2. All right, then with that, right below that, I changed around this for each a little bit. This line may or may not have been there before. I don't remember, but make sure that line is before the for each statement. And if you have to, modify the for each so it looks like it looks right here. All right. And then under the for each, I think that the is winner was set up like this already. You can double check to make sure. When you get done, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this on tape, when you get done, I believe I've given you all the changes. Save it, try to run it. I will myself in just a moment. If you save it and try to run it, and if for some reason it doesn't run, then save it out to a repo, all right, and send me an invite to that repo. I don't want to put a working copy out there because I want you to take the time and effort to key it in yourselves, as opposed to being able to just grab what I've done. I don't think that that's right. That's pretty much the way Evan's doing it too. I asked him, and he said that with the projects, he's typically rather taking the code and putting it up on the overhead and letting people see it there. He's not even keying it in like I'm doing. All right. We are now ahead of him. He finished up chapter 9 yesterday and started on chapter 10. He's going to finish chapter 10 today. And he is going, and then he's going to start on, I think he's going to say he's going to start on chapter 11 tomorrow. I don't remember. He sent me an email right before class started. All right, so that's everything. So now if I do come in here and do a file, save all, and I run this, there it is. So I play a game. Let's have X win the first time. And it says X wins, new game. Let's have O win. All right, and let's see if we can get a tie game. Okay, it's a tie. So I believe, to my knowledge at least, everything that's in here now works. All right. And I'm not saying that you totally understand it, but work your way through it. If you have questions, ask. But as I mentioned, I'd like you to not only turn in a working copy, but put a lot of comments in here to show what you know what's going on in the different phases of the program. All right. So that is it then for chapter 10 for the tic-tac-toe game. All right. Now, I didn't know whether to go over the stuff at the end of the chapter in here or not, but let's look at it, okay? So they ask you to update the model binding for the to-do list app. You are given all this stuff. I've already got a working copy of it, and so do you. All right. They give you this file, which is basically the way this looks at the end of the chapter. Then in Visual Studio, they ask you to run it, review how it works. All right. Says make sure to add one or more tasks. We already did that yesterday because it's empty originally. Then in the models directory, they want you to create a to-do view model with the following code. I'm not going to read that code. You can see it right here. Notice that really everything that's been put in there has been initialized. It's all to null, but it does have an initial value. All right. And we've got those filters in there from that filters class that allowed us to filter in 1, 2, or 3 different ways. All right. We've got the status, completed or open. We've got the category, work, home, etc. All right. We've got a dictionary that we're using in there. We've got the list of tasks, and we've got the current task. All right. Now it says, note that the view model provides all the properties necessary to store this that the app currently stores in the view bag. This is what I was trying to get across in the test that we were originally going to take, and then they said, let's not. And that is that typically the main reason that you are creating a view model is so that you don't have to be using view bag all over the place. And we've already talked about this because when you use the view model, it gives you compile time checking and IntelliSense. When you use view bag, it does not. All right, so we've already talked about that. I don't think I'm beating a dead horse, as they say. All right, then they wanted you to come in here and modify the index action method. All right. So it says in there, create a to-do model object, then modify the code. So it stores the data. It stores the data in the view bank, so it now puts it in the new model object. Well, let's quickly take a look at that. All right. So this was, I think this is it right here. So again, this said, open the home controller. Let's see if I can keep, we have both of these up here. Do it like that. Okay, so that view model was made. We were told exactly what to put in there into the view model, and that's right here. So that, again, there's nothing new in there. It's the stuff we had just gone over. Okay. It says there, note that the view model again provides everything. We just talked about that. So then open the home controller class. All right, so there that is. It says in the index method, create a to-do model object. All right, then as it says, after you do that, modify the code that stores the view bank so it now stores the new view model stuff. Again, as I already mentioned, this was my hope that this would replace, and that's what we would be doing on the test. Some apps, it works well to do that. Other ones, it does not. I had problems with it. So when we come in here in our index, there it is. There's the new to-do view model right there. All right. And as you can see, once we've done that, we replaced everything we were doing previously with ViewBag. We changed it and replaced it with model dot. And again, what you'll notice is when we come in here and we do a model dot, the IntelliSense kicks in. All right. Okay. And it says modify the return statement. Since we now have this model that we've been using in here, you'll notice that when we do a return, we're now doing a return view model. Also, when you look in here, notice we are using an action result. So we're doing a regular return view, but that view that we're doing, I guess it's here, we are doing model. Everything we're doing now basically is being done with model that was previously being done with a view bag. All right. Okay. Then it says to open up the associated view. All right. At the top, we have to change this. All right. And we have to change it from what it was, which was an IEnumerable, to a to-do view model object. All right. Then we're told to model the code so that it uses that. So again, in here, what you're seeing is it's model dot. All right. And remember, in the view, typically when we do it this way, it's model with a capital M, as opposed to the way that we were doing it in the controller, which is where we were using the lowercase m. All right. They mention in here when we get into working with the for each loop in here, this has got to change as well because now it's model dot tasks. All right. And then we're told to run it. I can, but it does work. And it should work. What they're saying here is it should work the same way that it did. So if I save this, you may or may not remember that I have two to-dos in mind from yesterday. Should still be here. I haven't looked at it today, but there they are. The do yoga which was an exercise category, the mow lawn, which is a home. One thing I don't like about the way that this is written right now, unless I'm missing something and I don't think I am, you can't modify. So like I'd like to make that a lowercase o. I believe what I'd have to do would be to delete it and then put it in there again. All right, which I don't think is good. And if I come here and I go, for example, my category, I change to exercise and I filter, then I've just got this one. If I go to do and I go to today and I filter, there's nothing that's due today. All right. If I go to future and filter, there's nothing that's due in exercise, it looks like. But if I go back to all and filter, that's what's left. All right. So these are the ones. Do I have anything that's completed? No. All right. I guess it's been deleted. And what do I have that's open? I would just want it all. Not showing me anything. I might have removed it. I didn't think I did, but I can come in here at any time. And again, just add something, exercise today. Category would be exercise. The due date, I want it today. So I'll put in 3/15/2023, and the status will be open. So I can add that. There it is. I guess they all were there. So there's exercise today. Now, again, if I go to category exercise, I should have just the top two, and I do. All right. If I mark this as completed, I did my exercise. Boom. It's changed to completed. All right. And if we go back again, let's go to home. And then let's go back again to all. Filter. Okay. I don't know. Yesterday, I think it was something that we put in the code. It was turning yellow, and maybe that's been removed now. I don't remember. All right. But it does appear to be working with those changes that were put in. In other words, it didn't break anything. All right. Then the rest of the stuff that we were supposed to do, rather, it says we were supposed to modify the home add action method. So it also works with a model. So in the home controller, there's the add method. And as you can see, it is again also now working, all right, with the model. Okay, and then finally, they want us to bind the view model to the home add view. Let me stop the run here. I don't need to run it anymore. All right. And if I go to my home add view here, it's the same kind of thing. All right. Now I talked to Evan, and he's going over some of these and he's not going over some other ones at the end of the chapter, but he is asking the students to do them. I said, are you having them turn them in? And he said, no. And I asked him, is that helping? And he said, well, when he's talked to students individually, it appeared as though the students who are going over the end of chapter exercises by themselves or in class if they get time, they're tending to do better on homework and tending to do better on the tests. All right. But, I mean, as always, a lot of people, I don't have time to do this. We're not getting graded for this, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So you want to do them fine. You don't want to do them fine. All right. Let's jump right into chapter 11 then. And as you can see, chapter 11 is on how to validate data. Now, let's talk about what we already know, and let's talk about what we learned in an earlier class, and finally, what we're going to be doing in here today. All right. You at least have an idea of how data validation works in MVC. We have used it, but we have used it almost totally in the guise of setting up an error message. We really haven't done much more than that. All right. So we're going to take a look, as it says here, at this registration page, and at a few other things that are in the chapter. Okay. Now, the next thing is when we start to get in here, this is all stuff, again, why do you validate? You want to make life as easy for the person running the program as possible. That's not all of it. You also want to make it as easy as possible for the actual server itself. What do I mean by that? Well, so far, all we've been doing has been server-side validation. But one thing that you learned in the AWD1000 class, and you can turn on in your ASP.NETs, is client-side validation. Now, to do that, you basically use the jQuery validation library to do it. So they're going to show that. So again, it's going to start, we're going to come up in here, we're going to get this registration page that is going to talk about validation, and then this entire app that's going to put it in. We'll do that. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's at the end of the chapter. All right. And then tomorrow, because what I did was I went back and I looked at what I did as opposed to what the book did. Theirs is quite a bit different. So what I want to do is make sure that mine is working the correct way. And if it's not, I'll give you more of a hybrid between mine and the one that's in the book. But we will do tomorrow as a class. And again, it will still be due, but we've now finished the tic-tac-toe app. So tomorrow we will work on this quarterly sales app. And when you look at it, okay, it'll have a database, just so you know. And these are some of the validations you'll be able to do. All right. So we're trying to add a new employee, and it's telling us that Catherine Johnson, with that date of birth, is already in the database. All right. And Catherine Johnson cannot report to Catherine Johnson. That's just the rule that they made up. In addition, when you look in here, we're going to have an employee, and we're also going to have an employee sales. So when you look in here, this is saying that for Grace Hopper in Q1 of 2019, we want this value. Well, that value is already in the database. All right. That's why you're getting that error message. So we're going to go through all that tomorrow, which will necessitate us building models for an employee, building a model for sales. All right. I think we're going to have a view. I believe we had a view model in there, etc. So we're going to go through all this stuff. And what you see in there, I'm not going to read a bit of it, but notice when it says here are the requirements for valid data for an employee, we've got some there. Here are the requirements for valid data for sales. We've got some there. All right. In addition, we are going to include the jQuery validation because why? You should know this already, that typically if you've got a form that you're going to be submitting to a server, you will first validate the form on the client side. If there are any errors, you will make the user fix those errors before you go and send that form to the server. But once it gets to the server, you will typically run either the same set of tests or very similar tests to make sure it works there. You validate on both the client and on the server because it is possible for a user to either A, have valid or have JavaScript disabled, or B, there are certain little tricks and there are go-arounds or get-arounds that you can do. But especially considering the fact that this information is going into a database, you want to validate both on the client and the server. All right, so these are all of our specs right here. So we will go through those tomorrow as we build this. All right, so with that said, let's just jump into the chapter. Again, some of the information that's in here we've already talked about, either in this class or in the AWD 1000 class. All right. Okay. Now, when we let's just start by going in here and taking a look. All right. Now, you have seen this kind of thing before. If model dot is valid. Okay. So in other words, you don't want to do something. You don't want to do something unless you have some tests that you made and all those tests pass. In this particular example that they have here, they're expecting a movie name, all right, but it's defaults to empty. So if you don't put a name in, it'll still work. All right. The other thing that's in there is a rating, and you'll notice it's an integer. All right. It's an int. And if we don't put it in as an int, we get an error message. The key takeaway from that is that error message isn't using the quote regular validation that we've talked about before. That is being provided by the controller because of this line right here. It is failing the model state dot is valid. All right, since it's failing that, it's automatically providing in a summary up here in the validation summary, that's automatically providing any errors. All right. And really, when you think about it, if it's as simple as this, so you've got a string for name, it's already defaulted to the empty string. Really, the only way that you can break this or get an error is if you put in something non-numeric, or you put in something that that is blank right there for the rating. And either way, you should get that message. All right. In fact, the other one might say something like you must enter a number. I don't know. Okay. So they mention here when the model view controller cannot cast a value to the specified data type, it adds the error message to the model state property of the controller class. So I'm trying to get across here is this stuff is all working together. All right. So when you run the is valid, it's looking up here to see how this was set up. It's looking in here to see what was actually entered. And if the two map up, good. Then it'll just return you back, all right, probably to the list. So if you come in here, you've now added a movie and you've added a rating. Otherwise, if it fails, all right, what's going to typically happen, and what I want you to get out of this, is it's going to return you right to where you were. All right. That's not that important here because we only have two fields. But imagine you had a very complex form. In fact, let's make it one of medium complexity. Let's say you were asking for 8 fields. First 9 fields. First name, middle name, last name, address, city, state, zip code, cell phone, and email address. That's 9 fields. Well, if you have 8 of those fields correct, but you screwed up on one of them, maybe you didn't put a valid email address in. This is going to return you right to the page you were at, and the values will still be in there. So you can go back and make the changes to the one field out of the 9 that was bad, and the other ones have maintained their value. All right. Okay. All right. So as they mentioned back in chapter 2, we talked about decorating model properties with data attributes. So what they're going to show you next is some of the ones we looked at along with some of the new ones. Now, we've already worked with required. You know what that is. As it says, it checks to make sure the value of the property is not null or does not have the empty string or just white space. All right. As it says there, to work properly, whatever property this decorates must be nullable. Typically that you put that question mark in there. That's whether it's a numeric or a non-numeric. All right. Okay, then we've got the range attribute. As it says, it works with a specified range. Now, we may or may not have talked about this before, but this thing must implement the iComparable interface. You may or may not remember that interface from the AWD1115 C# programming class. But with an iComparable interface, to show you this real quick, if you have 2 values, all right, it wouldn't normally be numbers, but let's just put them in here so we see this. If I have 54 and I have 46, and I do an iComparable on this, what that's going to do is that's going to actually return a 1. So when you compare this value first and this value, if the first value is bigger than the second value, it returns a 1. On the other hand, if we flip those, or we made that a 44, now the first value is less than the second value, so that's going to return a -1. Finally, if the two values are the same, then it returns a 0. That's how iComparable works. Now, some books will tell you that if the first one is less than the second one, it returns a negative number. If the first one is greater than the second one, it returns a positive number. I have never seen it return anything other than -1 and 1. All right. And again, if they're equal 0. Okay. So those are all things we've talked about before. Now, there's a few things in here we have not talked about before. So let's look at those before we look at the table. The next one is the string length. As it says, it checks to make sure the string property doesn't exceed a specified number of characters. So you're giving it a max length, basically. All right. Then there's regular expression. We talked some regular expression in the AWD1000 class. If you don't remember, what is it? Is it regex.info? I always forget. No. There it is. Regular-expressions.info. There are a multitude of different websites out there that will help you with regular expressions. This is the one I use virtually all the time. And the reason I use it virtually all the time is, although it's kind of an ugly site, who cares? So you should be able to just put it in like that. All right. And it goes through different programming languages. There's a tutorial in here, a quick start, a reference, etc. All right. And remember, what are you doing when you're using regular expressions? Typically, you are doing the equivalent of a substring operation. So in other words, what you're really doing is you're seeing if some string is included in another string. All right. That's not always the case, but quite often, at least, it is. We talked about the characters. So starts with, you use the caret, ends with, you use the $sign. I even gave you this in the past. And if you had Evan, you may or may not have seen this. I don't know. But there is a website. It's pretty simple. It's html5pattern.com. And you go out to there, again, a pretty ugly site. But if you want something, for example, like zip code, all right, and it shows you exactly what it should look like. So again, this pattern would say you can, or what you want to put in here is 5 digits and then optionally a hyphen and 4 digits. All right, same kind of thing with phone numbers. So there's the American, and there's a lot of different ways that you can set this up. All right, right now that's pretty ugly. There's the USA one right there. So it's literally set up to hold 3 digits, a hyphen, 3 digits, a hyphen, and four digits. All right, you'd have to do more work and provide additional patterns if you wanted to allow the parenthesis, the area code to be in parens, etc. Now, some of the stuff that's in here, for example, emails, they'll even say, do not use a pattern for email validation. All right, because virtually every regular expression pattern either has something you don't need or doesn't have something you do need. I will say that if you go out and Google it, you can find some really, really long, fairly god-awful patterns. All right, and there are other sites like this as well, but this is one that I've used in the past. All right, between that and the regular expression.info. All right, there's a compare. All right. And why would you use the compare? An example with this one would be that if you had a password and then you had repeat password type of thing in there. You could compare to make sure the first password that was put in equal the second one. All right, there's the display, and the display is like, it's like the placeholder that we used back in our days of AWD1000. All right, as it says, it specifies how the name should be displayed to the user. All right, so they've got some examples in here. Most of them hopefully are pretty self-evident. Again, we've done the required. There's a string length which says the movie cannot have a name greater than 30 characters. All right, so they are putting in something bigger than that. You can see the message. And remember, right now, they are not using customized error messages. So the field name plus the name must be whatever. That's all being supplied by the system itself. You can go in and add your own error message up here, and they'll talk about that in just a bit. All right, so these are the ones that we just mentioned. Here is where we're actually adding our own error messages. We've done that before, so there's nothing new there. All right. All right, so the next thing they have here is this registration page that has data validation in it. So you should be able to take a look at this, and ideally, at least, it should make sense. All right, so if we take a look at some of the stuff that's in here, it's a customer class. All right, notice for username, it's a regular expression. So in other words, when you look in here, what it's saying is it can have only uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, one or more, and that's it. So it can't contain any special characters. Okay, then we've got a date of birth in here. I don't know if that's John or what. All right, so then we've got a date of birth in here. And with that date of birth, notice we've got a range operator in there. Okay, and we put the range operator in there. The key thing to note is that what we have to do in there is we have to cast that and let it know that what we're using is a date time field. Otherwise, it thinks this is just a string. All right. Okay, then we've got a password, and all that is it's got a maximum string length of 25. But then we've got our confirm password. All right. And the display name is confirm password. They could have done a compare in there. It looks like they're not. So we could have done a compare and given it a value to compare to. In other words, password and compare password. All right. Now, it says they're a validation tag in a strongly typed view that posts a customer object. Well, again, remember that when we use that for equal, we use whatever that's there. Okay. We can use this if we want to. We can have a label in there that has an ASP4. We're not using any labels here. We're not setting it up with any labels on here. These are just the tags themselves. So the system is basically saying username. So it looks for the match in username. Date of birth, etc. So you create this one. You can see what's wrong with this one. The fact that we have not put anything in for the confirm password. The fact that the password and the confirm password don't match. All right. That the date doesn't make any sense because, you know, that person would be like 150 years old, and that the username has a special character in it. Now, in here, again, what you'll notice when you look in here is we do have error messages. Please enter a username. All right, but that's it. So we did enter one, but the username may not contain any special characters. That wasn't given by us. In fact, I guess it was. Username may not contain any special characters. All right. Date of birth must be after 1/1/1900. That is this one. All right. The passwords do not match. I'm looking in here for that. I don't see it. We've got to please enter a password and please confirm your password. So there's that one. But we don't have a please enter password. You can go in and you can make multiple checks in here, and you can have multiple different error messages in here depending upon what you're checking. All right, and that's all explained in the chapter here. All right. No, it's stuck again. Great. All right, we're on 409. Okay. Okay. Now, the next thing that's in here is, and you can read it yourselves, of course, how to control the user experience. And a big thing in here is that human beings take cues. All right, CUES. They understand most things. Most people, for example, they equate red with a problem. They equate green with a non-problem type of thing. That's one of the reasons, as they say, when you do the validation summary, it displays in red. Now, I believe it displays in red like they showed it here, but it's not bolded. But you could go in and add strong tags or add it in your CSS file to do that if you want to. The bottom line, though, is this. You want to make it as easy as possible for the user to enter information. And I'd really extend it to have it say, instead, you want to make it as hard as possible for the user to screw up. But if they do screw up, because people will, all right, you don't want to berate them for it. You want to give them an error message. It should be terse. And what I mean is it shouldn't be a lot of stuff in there. They should have just a few words and it should explain to them what they did wrong. All right. So they talk about formatting the validation messages in there with CSS. And as it says, you can define style rules in your CSS classes for how tags appear to the user. All right. So you could do virtually anything you wanted to do in there. Now, what have they done here? Well, notice they've got input validation error. And when you look in here, how does that look different? Well, now what they've done is they've come in and any field that is wrong for any reason, all right, they are drawing a reddish border around it, and they are changing the color of it to camel. And if you want to, you could take the first field that's wrong and you could set the focus there. And that's what they're showing in here. All right. As it says again, when performing validation, Model View Controller emits HTML that has CSS classes you can use to style the appearance of your validation. All right. So how to check validation state and set and use code to set validation messages. Notice what it says here. The model state property has a data type of model state dictionary. What does that mean? That means, like everything else we've done this semester that uses key values, it's going to have key value pairs in it. All right. And it says it stores any validation messages produced during model binding. Why is that important? Well, it's actually important for a couple of reasons. Number one, they mention in there, if you want, if you've got multiple errors, you've got your choice. You can just say error, and you can give a count for how many different errors there are. As it says there, the count property returns the number of key value pairs sent to the server, but the error count is the number of associated validation messages. What that means is there may be several things that were wrong with the same field. All right. So, I mean, if you took a field in there that was supposed to be a number and you either put it out of range or you did, you made it non-numeric, there might be more than one error is what I'm saying. All right. The is valid property returns false if there's any validation message whatsoever. All right. Now they do mention some stuff because this is stuff we haven't talked about before. It says the second table that's shown on the following page shows two of the methods for the model state dictionary class. The add model error adds a validation message. the get validation state returns the validation state of a specified property. All right. And what you can do is you can somewhat have control when it goes and looks through different things. And if there's an error in there, all right, you have some control over what you show and what you don't show. They give an example in here and they talk about date of birth. So think about when you do a date of birth, what do you have to do? Well, the first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to make sure that whatever has been put into the date of birth, all right, whatever has been put into there is an actual date, as an example. Next, I want to make sure that whatever gets put in there for a date of birth is not greater or does not come after the current date. All right, so in other words, if I said somebody, their date of birth was 3/15/2024, that's not possible because that's a year from now. All right. Then if those two things succeed, then I can go in there and make a check. Now the system, since it's a date type, should automatically go in and check to make sure that the month is between 1 and 12, the day is between 1 and 31, or 1 and 30, or 1 and 29, or 1 and 28. Now I would, it says here, the date of birth value, it's a date that's later than this and it's before this. All right. So again, they talk about the future date. The bottom line is this. If you are writing stuff like this, if you are creating an application that's going to be used, all right, out and the public is going to use it, you want to try to come up with every possible way somebody can screw up what you're asking them to do and account for it. All right. And if you keep that in mind, you're going to be much better off. So this is just kind of a repeat of what I just mentioned. Now, next, they talk about the difference between model level and property level validation messages. All right. It says in the last figure, you learn how to associate a validation message with a property or with the overall model. It says, what difference does that make? It says MVC has additional features that you can use when displaying and some stuff differently based on whether it is a property validation or a model validation. All right. So it says the first figure shows the tag helpers you can use with data validation. Again, it says some of them have been used in the book so far. All right. But the bottom line is this, that when you are working with a model level validation, basically you're working with divs. All right. You are working with block level elements. All right. And when you're working with property level, you're working with spans or inline level. Now, I'm being very generic there in my explanation, but that's pretty much what they say in here. All right. All right. Next, this is, as it says here, how you go in and how you enable client-side validation. And I'll tell you what, I've got 12:59, so let's take 10 minutes. We'll just start up again at 1:10, and we're going to continue on from there. I'll be right back. All right, it is 1:10, so I'm going to continue on. We're on page 416, how to enable client-side validation. And they go through a big song and dance, and it's a lot of the same stuff I've already told you as far as it's a good practice not only to validate on the server, but to first validate on the client. We talked about the fact that it is possible that the user can have JavaScript disabled, but let's face it, Joe or Joan, average user, probably doesn't even realize what everything that JavaScript is doing, so they probably don't have it disabled on their machine. Okay, all right. As it says, doing that can improve the responsiveness as the app, and it's making the server do work it doesn't. It's not making it do work it doesn't have to do anyway. All right. So they mentioned there, it says it's fairly easy to enable client-side validation for an MVC app. All you need to do is add the jQuery libraries that are shown in figure 11.7, and they were described back in chapter 3. As mentioned there, these libraries use the data val attributes to perform data validation without making the trip to the server. All right, it says this works well with MVC since it automatically emits data val attributes when you use server-side validation as described in the chapter. So when we look right here, these are some of the things that we have been including typically in all of our files anyway, in our view files. All right. And basically, we're just saying to add them. Now, one thing that's important on this, we've talked about this kind of thing before. All right. But if you're going to use these, they must be put in the order that they're shown here. In other words, jQuery.min.js should come first, followed by jQuery.validate.min.js, followed by jQuery.validate.unobtrusive.min.js. Now, you may or may not care, but I'm going to come in here. What is it? jQuery validator, I think it was. All right, I put in jQuery validator here, and it's coming up with jQueryvalidation.org, and it's a plugin with form validation from jQuery. All right, the reason I'm telling you this is about a 12-minute long video that I always go through in my AWD1000 class. They show a couple of examples in there. It doesn't directly pertain. It's more just HTML oriented, but it shows you how to set up the validation that you're going to be doing on the client side. It's probably worth a look for you. And again, it's just under jQueryvalidation.org if you have the time and the desire to take a look at it. Okay. Now, as they mention here, there are some caveats. So there's some things you've got to worry about. Not everything works seamlessly when you bring jQuery in, because again, you're bringing in a client-side piece of software that you're trying to get it to work on the server. All right. Even though it's client-side stuff that it's doing, it's reacting with a server-side program. All right. So as it says there, it works correctly with property level validation. So just the simple stuff, not an entire model's worth. All right. Next, any server-side validation doesn't run until the client side passes. This can lead to a two-step process that may annoy some users. Now, what they're saying basically is if you are running the same things on both the client side and the server side, it's doing double duty. All right. Most users, if you ask them, would rather have something take a little bit longer and know that it's secure as opposed to, not being as secure where it might take a little less time. All right. Then as it says, not all data annotations work properly on the client. It says in the example below, for instance, the range isn't working the way that it should. All right. All right. So add the libraries. We talked about that. Again, even though it's optional, it should always be done. All right. Now there's going to be a whole section that they're going to come up with on how to do this in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage in just a few pages. But first, they talk here about how to customize server-side validation. All right. Now it says the built-in attributes that MVC provides are often all you need, but you might want to do some stuff on your own. All right. So if we look here at the chart, notice there's classes that you can use to create a custom data attribute. All right. Now, will you ever need this? The answer to that question is it depends on what it is you want to validate and how complex the validation process is. All right. If we look at the stuff that we've been doing, by and large, it's been pretty easy. All right. And like, for example, right now we're getting into the JavaScript portion in the AWD1000 class. Today, we actually brought in event handlers, and we were looking, you may or may not remember from chapter 4, we were looking at the miles per gallon program. All right. Well, when you think about it, there's two ways for miles per gallon. What, the way that I set it up for them was I said, let's assume that the miles driven has to be between 1 and 1,000, and the gallons used has to be between 1 and 100, as an example. Those could be handled by using just range validators and going in and putting a message in there. Or you could go in if you wanted to make and go in and create specific validators that would be used, maybe not just there, but maybe in a lot of other classes, you could write your own. So again, what they're talking about here is being able to go in and not circumvent what they're doing, but in addition to it, add your own stuff. All right. Now, would you ever need to do that? As I mentioned, it depends on what you're working on and just how ornate the custom validation is or is not. So the first table, as mentioned, presents those three classes: the validation attribute class, the validation context class, and the validation result class. All right. Then there's another table that presents, as it says, the is valid. And that's, again, a fairly simplistic thing, but notice what it says. You can put in there what you want to check, and then the second is a validation context object. So basically, it's a quick down and dirty check you can make. Is it valid or is it not? And the third one, as it says, provides a constructor, all right, which accepts a string value. So again, you can go as nuts with this as you need to. So they go through and they've got this example that they use in here for a past due date. All right. And they mention you got to go through different things. First, you've got to go through and say, is it even a date? All right. Then if it's a date, all right, you've got to go through and cast it from into a date time. Then you have to check if it's in the past. All right. In other words, is the date less than today, date.today type of thing. All right. And you can do it that way. Now, really, with the example they give in here, you could do this example that they show here on page 419, and you could do this example, I think, not only easier, but I think it would work just as well, if not better, without using custom validators. What I got out of this section was, although this stuff is plausible and possible to use in here, there's probably very rarely going to need a time or be a time that you need to use it. All right. Okay. Okay. How to pass values to a custom data attribute. Again, you can use the constructor to do that, and you can use name properties to accept data. All right. When you use an attribute, you've got to code the values for the constructor parameters first, followed by the things for the property. What does that mean? Take a look. All right. There's a years from now type of thing. Why would you want something like that? Well, you may have noticed that today, a lot of times when you fill out a form and you fill out a form for a credit card, it may have the current year, when they say how long is your card good till. I noticed that in the past, when I get a card, it's always good for about a year, approximately a year. The last one that I got, I actually had some suspicious stuff, some suspicious charges on my card, so I got a new card. All right, the reason I'm telling you that is that was about 6 months ago, and now the expire date on it is, I don't know, it's sometime in 27. I've never had that before when it's been pushed that far out into the future. But if you wanted to do that and you were creating a form and you wanted to be able to put from the current date or from the current year until 5 years or whatever more, you might want to do something customized, is what I'm getting to. All right. Checking multiple properties is the thing that's discussed next. And it says the two custom data attributes you've seen so far, check only the property that they decorate. Well, what if you had something, and I think they give an example. Yeah, it says the required contact info that's in here checks that the user has entered either a phone number or an email address, or I guess both. So in other words, it's a combined validator. You want to make sure that you've got some way of contacting the person. All right. So when we take a look at what's in there, okay, notice we're working with an object. And then what we're saying is, if this is empty and that's empty, then it's an error. Otherwise, it's okay. So if you've got either one or both, you're fine. And they also mention here for that, it says because this custom data attribute class only works with the customer model class, it may be hard to reuse. As a result, it says it sometimes can make more sense to validate the entire class than create different attributes. And that's known as class level validation. And that's what's shown in here. So basically that's checking everything that you're passing, and you're having an entire class, not just members of that class. Again, this can be the kind of thing where if you're creating a lot of applications that have a similar type of interface, you might want to create something like this. All right, where you can talk about the checks you want, set them up the way you want, give the messages, error messages or success messages you want to have, etc. All right. All right. So a little earlier, we talked about client-side validation. All right. So we talked about how to add it. And as they say in here, okay, they talk about how to customize what's in there. Well, just like you can customize what's happening on the server side, you can also customize what is happening on the client side. All right. So notice as it says there, when you create a custom data attribute, it's a good practice to enable it to perform validation on the client too. We've already talked about why that's the case. All right. To add it, as it says, you start by updating your data attribute class so that it emits the data val star attributes that the jQuery libraries need. And they show that inside of here. Excuse me. All right. Okay. Then moving on, how to add a validation method to the jQuery validation library. So in other words, if you want to be able to add your own stuff to this, again, I already mentioned to you taking a look at what was in here, and they show some of that stuff in there. I thought that was very well done. So what they're doing in here is it says it's telling the jQuery libraries to use what you have created. So notice to do that, you need to add a JavaScript function that performs the validation to the jQuery library. All right, so you are adding something to it. And they show you how to do that in here. Again, it's not so much that this is that hard, but for what we're doing, I'm not sure as to whether or not we would need to use it. All right. Now to implement this, you use the add method function And the add method function adds the JavaScript function that performs the validation. And then to map that JavaScript validation function to its HTML, to those data val star attributes, you need to use the JavaScript function to add the function, all right, to the collection of the functions that are already in the jQuery unobtrusive validation library. And they kind of give you some explanations on how to do that right here. All right, they're adding the method, and then they're adding the code that goes with the method, then they're adding it over here where it's needed. All right, we've already got this. Then we can go in and add our own in here. All right. Then the next thing that's discussed, kind of interesting, is remote validation. So notice what it says here. It says, in addition to enabling custom attributes that run on the client, you can write code on the server that's called by the client without having to reload the page. All right. Well, remember, if you're doing things on the client only and you do a reload, it's different than if you're doing something on the server and you do a reload. When you're on the client and you do a reload, you're not sending anything to the server if you're doing client-side only validation. All right. So if you want to do that, as it says, to enable that, you can use the remote attribute in the Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC namespace. And that is shown right here. All right. Notice the property as it says there. The one property of this class is the additional fields property. And as it says, it's a list of additional values to be sent to a specific action method. All right. All right. Most of the rest of the chapter then, starting on page 430, is this registration app. I don't believe I have it up, so I am going to bring it up right now. Let's see, it should be under book apps, chapter 11 registration. I believe this is it. So I'm not going to monkey with it because this is the one, this is the working copy. So if we start here, wait till it comes up. All right, so if we start here by running the program, you'll see that it's pretty simplistic. Now, there's a bunch of stuff missing because I've got my screen size set at about 400%. All right, there it's 100%, but notice when I click register, this is what I get. I can make it bigger, I guess. So what do we need in here? The easiest way to find out is to just click this. All right, we need a username. All right, I'm going to put in just a letter. And now notice it took that. So it seems to like that. All right, enter an email address. So I'll put in my Rankin email address. All right, enter a date of birth. And I'm just making that up. So now, yep, those are both good. Enter a password. I'll just put in hi. All right, notice password and confirm password do not match. I'm going to put in hi again. All right, and now notice everything worked. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, it means it worked in that case. I get that. But is that what we wanted? For instance, do we want to allow a username that's just a letter? All right. Do we want to allow a password that's just 2 letters? So there's a lot of stuff that's got to go into this when you start to think about what's in here. First of all, are you going to have minimum and maximum sizes? Second, are you going to have things in there where they have to be letters, numbers, whatever? More and more of these things today, when you're setting this up, probably in a password at least, that has to be at least 8 characters, has to have a capital letter in it, a lowercase letter in it, a number in it, and a special character in it. You might want similar things in a username. Plus, and we're not getting into that much detail in this class, but you'd also want to make sure that if this username is going into a database, that the username doesn't already exist. All right. Now, some places too, when you register, they will only allow you to register under one email address. So in other words, I can't have two usernames with the same email address. Some places will let you do that. Some places will not let you do that. And I know with me, there's a heck of a lot of stuff that I've registered for work that I've used my charter account. So I can have a different username than the username I have for my Rankin account. All right, date of birth, we've already talked about. Password I mentioned to you before as far as size, letter requirements, etc. All right. So they mention on page 431 in the book, it says that this page uses data validation to make sure every field has a value. The username cannot have special characters. So if I come in here and write for a username Jeff with an exclamation point, all right, and I click, then notice username may not contain special characters. All right. The email address can't already be in use. So let's try this. I'm going to put in Jeff here, and I'm going to put in JP Scott at Rankin, and it says that email address is already in use. That was the one I just put in. All right. Now, it's only seeing if that address, it's not seeing it, if I come in here and put in that, it takes it. That might not even be a valid email address, but it's taking it. And I can put in the same thing here. I can even use the same password because, again, as far as the system is concerned, these are two different people. So now in here, I've got a Jeff. All right, I've got a Jeff with JP Scott at rankin.edu 1/1/2000. I just put hi and a hi there. Another Jeff with JP Scott at rankin.edu 2/1/2000, hi and hi. Now I'm going to have a hard time because that's not a real address, so I'm not going to be able to do anything with it. All right. Okay. The password has to be less than 25 characters, and these two things have to match. That's it. All right. The registration page, as they mentioned, validates the user on the client as a convenience to users, but then performs the same validation out on the server. And as you've already seen, it uses CSS to highlight whatever may be problematic. All right. So there's a customer model class that is shown here on page 433. Now notice how it decorates the properties with attributes, a lot of them that we've already used. Required, error message. We've now looked at regular expression. The point is, notice we've got two different validation things in here for the for the username. They each have their own message. The required has a message and the regular expression has a message. And again, you can be as whatever with this as you need to or want to be. All right. When I say as whatever, I mean you can be as detailed, but you should always come up with some kind of a description. And that description that you come up with should explain to the end user what the heck is going on. All right. But yet it should be terse enough and it should be professional enough, all right, that you never talk down to the user. All right. Notice here, for example, date of birth. You must be at least 13 years old. All right. Well, that's going to require some custom type of stuff in here. Okay. That's the daytime DOB. All right. Where it's going to have to be able to check, and it's going to have to check whatever you entered for your date of birth. All right. It's going to have to take and subtract that from the current date to find out what your current age is. Right. Let's see. Notice what it says here. This registration context class communicates with the database. All right. So again, we're going to have to go back and in our program.js, we're going to have to use the SQL server. And in our app settings.json file, we're going to have to come in and put in our connection string is what they're saying. All right. The minimum age attribute that's shown right here. This is what I just mentioned. All right. This can take some work. All right. And what's funny is, you're asking the person to fill in stuff, right? And it's not the same thing as if you're checking IDs to let somebody, for example, come in to a bar. All right, there you can take a look at them, and if somebody comes in and they're really 10 years old, it's even if they had an ID, you can look at them and go, that isn't you, or whatever. But on here, if somebody is smart enough that if they know that their birth date, let's say they're 13 years old, all right, and they were born in what? It's 2023. They were born in 2010, let's say, so they're 13. But they're not 13 yet. All they have to do is just fudge the date and make their year of birth, 1 year, 1 year earlier than it is. All right. I always find it funny, and I don't know if I've never bought cigarettes in my life, but I know when I go to a gas station and the person in front of me is buying cigarettes, that they ask them their date of birth. And I just find it funny, because there was a lady in there one day and she goes, really? And the guy goes, yeah. And she said, I'm 80. And he said, that's not why we do it, ma'am. Okay, they got a reason for doing it, whatever that reason is. So notice in here, they are overriding the is valid method of the validation attribute. All right. So you can see as you walk through this, if value is date time, then they're going and they're converting it. All right. Then they're going basically and they're checking to see whether or not it is 13 or more years. All right. And they're going to return that basically it is or it is not. All right. And the actual logic for it is right there. All right. Says here the registration page uses remote validation to enable the client to check whether the email address is already in the database. Again, you should be able, you're all smart enough to think about what this is doing. It's going to have to go in, check the database itself, and it's going to have to see if anything, like you saw it with mine, was jpscott@rankin.edu already in there. All right. It says, however, if the user has JavaScript disabled, the check doesn't occur on the client. In that case, the registration page also checks the address on the server. It says to reduce duplication, both of them call the same method to perform the check. And we've talked about this before. I've often heard this referred to as the double round trip problem. All right, where it's going one round trip, where it's doing all this stuff on the client. And if it succeeds, it's going out to the server and it's doing a lot, if not the same stuff on the server. All right. The check email, the important thing with the check email is what was put in there a valid email. All right. And again, does that email exist? So you want to check at least a couple things in there. All right. We already talked about, or I mentioned to you, some of the problems per se with when you are working with this, as far as what you have to do, all right, with emails. And I showed you that example where it even said on there that when you are using an email on that HTML5 patterns, it said, don't try to come up with a pattern. You can. I've gone out to Stack Overflow and looked out there for different patterns. Some of them are unbelievably long, for lack of better words. All right. And then they go and finally they show you the layout file and the index view file. So when we look here, as it says, shows you the Razor layout for the registration app. It includes the main jQuery library. All right. It places the script tag for the jQuery library at the end of the body tag, as opposed to putting it up above and using the defer. It's funny because one of the things I had always been doing was using defer and putting these tags up in the head section whenever I could. But we found this semester a couple times it's been problematic. What I mean is stuff hasn't worked the way you think it would, and just moving it down to the bottom of the page and putting it right before the ending body tag, then it works. All right. So as it says, this layout loads the main jQuery page for every page in the registration app. In addition, it provides a way for the other pages to load the additional necessary JavaScript files so that the validation can take place. And they mention, it says, since this approach only loads the JavaScript validation files on pages they're needed, as mentioned there, it says it can decrease the amount of time it takes to load a page. All right. So the other thing that we're keeping in mind here is just the fact that for some people, if stuff doesn't load enough, they just leave the page. All right. And a lot of people are just impatient to begin with. All right. So as mentioned here on the bottom of the page, again, it includes the jQuery library at the end of the body tag. All right. But as it says, you can put it in the head if you prefer. I'd suggest if you do that, you use the defer tag along with it. And as it says, it also calls the render section. Remember this render section. We looked at this in a much earlier chapter. All right, by putting that in there, basically it's telling you, it says it allows individual views to add it as necessary. All right, so if you don't need it, you don't need to add it. Finally, the last thing that's in here on pages 440 and 441 is this register index view. All right. As they mentioned there, it's a strongly typed view with a customer object as a model. All right. Says this is the section that the layout in the previous figure renders after it includes the main jQuery library. It has 3 script tags. All right. To bring in the necessary validation. All right. That way, they mention on the bottom of the page, the files again are only loaded for the registration page, and they're not going to be loaded for the other pages as they're not necessary on there. All right, so that's it for the chapter. Okay, and what I would like to do, and I'm done for today. I had no idea how long this would take. All right, but I want to look at this, and I'm going to go run through this right now. And if I think it's worth it, we'll start with that tomorrow. All right, and we'll go through the stuff that's in here. Regardless, what we will do tomorrow is we will go through this. We're going to build this together, this quarterly sales app. We looked at this a little bit earlier. Here's our main page, our home index page. There's our add employee page. There's our add sales page. And our specs are right here. I'm not going to read them to you. All right. So we'll run through that tomorrow. We'll create everything on there that we'll have to do. Now, I have fallen behind. Shame on me for grading. I promise you, I'm going to do the best I can all period Friday, because it's a lab period. I'm going to grade. My goal is anything you have turned in by Friday, I will have graded. What that means is, since Sunday, your work for chapters 10 and 11 is due, if you don't have them turned in yet, they won't be graded by then. I'll see if I can grade on Sunday. I don't have any idea what the plans are for my, outside of rank in life, so to speak. All right. But we will go through this. Remember, just because we're doing these together, I still want you to do them, turn them in, and comment them. All right. And finally, then on the case study, you should be this week, you've got due 8 and 9. All right. And 8 again was using the temp data to display messages like this one, and then using the view model with the incidents manager. Not really very much as far as requirements. And then for 9, it was to update the incidents. All right. And then for 10 and 11, which we're doing now, 10 is again adding some filtering. So notice we now have 3 different types of incidents in here. We've got all incidents, which is everything, unassigned incidents, and those are ones that do not right now, I think they haven't been assigned to I don't know if it's to a customer or what, I don't remember. And then we've got open incidents like this one, all right, that they're been assigned, etc., but they haven't been completed yet. All right. And then finally on 11, as it says, you are to improve validation. You should be hopefully able, like with the customer here, just to go out and use exactly what we just went over in the chapter. And hopefully that'll at least make some sense as far as what you have to do. All right. Okay. So again, tomorrow we're going to start by taking a look at this. Exercise 11.1, adding data validation to an app. When we get done with that, we're going to jump right then into the project in here, which again is this quarterly sales app. That's all I had for today, and I will talk to you then tomorrow. Have a good day.